A successful financial manager dies in a rainy highway crash. His wife shows no tears at the funeral. Then a dashcam reveals the truth. Someone tampered with the brakes. Text messages expose a secret affair. Bank records show a planned escape. This is the story of Raul Vergara, a man whose second chance at love became a calculated murder plot orchestrated by the two people closest to him. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those you trust most. August 2018. Lopez, Quezon Province, Philippines. The national highway stretched through heavy rainfall, visibility reduced to nearly zero as storm clouds blanketed the region in premature darkness. At approximately 3 p.m., a black SUV navigated the treacherous conditions at considerable speed. As the vehicle approached a sharp curve, its rear wheels lost traction on the rain-slicked pavement. The driver attempted to compensate, but the correction came too late. The SUV collided with a concrete barrier, the impact reverberating through the storm as metal crumpled and the windshield shattered into countless fragments. A passing motorist witnessed the collision and immediately contacted emergency services. Rescue personnel arrived within minutes, working quickly to access the vehicle's interior. Inside, they found the driver, engineer Raul Vergara, 47 years old, unconscious with no vital signs. Despite attempts at CPR, he was pronounced deceased at the scene. Raul Vergara had been a successful manager at a prominent financial institution, specializing in loans for private and government employees. He was known for his professionalism, attention to detail, and careful approach to both business and personal matters. He was survived by his second wife, Liza Vergara, 35 years old. But Liza wasn't his first marriage. Understanding Raul's story required going back nearly 2 decades. In 2000, Raul had married Maribel Santiago, his college classmate and first love. 1 year after their wedding, they welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Clarice. The young family seemed to have a promising future ahead. Tragedy struck in 2008 when Maribel died from complications related to dengue fever that wasn't diagnosed quickly enough for effective treatment. Clarice was only 8 years old, and her mother's death profoundly affected her development and worldview. Raul made the difficult decision to raise his daughter as a single parent. He sent Clarice to Manila to attend an exclusive school, supported by his extended family and parents, who helped provide the stability and resources she needed during such a traumatic period. Clarice proved academically gifted. By the time she reached college age, she'd earned a scholarship to a university in California. She relocated permanently to the United States, living under the care of relatives there while pursuing her education. With his daughter established abroad and the acute pain of losing Maribel gradually softening, Raul began cautiously opening himself to the possibility of companionship again. In 2013, he attended a business conference where he met Liza, intelligent, attractive, and charming. She quickly captured his attention with her engaging personality and apparent warmth. Before their marriage in 2015, some of Raul's friends made casual comments about Liza's flirtatious behavior with other men, her tendency to engage in playful conversation, and maintain close friendships with male acquaintances. Raul dismissed these observations as harmless personality traits, never seriously questioning her commitment or fidelity. Over the following years, Raul believed himself fortunate to have found love a second time. He had no way of knowing that this second chance would ultimately lead to his destruction. On the day of the accident, Raul had been traveling alone from a business meeting in Lucena, heading toward Gumacha to meet with a contractor. He'd left the family driver, a man named Benji, 32 years old, with instructions to transport Liza to Tagaytay for what she'd described as an important appointment. The police report characterized the incident straightforwardly. Excessive speed combined with hazardous road conditions resulted in loss of vehicle control. No suspicious circumstances were noted in the initial investigation. For family and friends, it appeared to be a tragic accident, the kind of senseless loss that occurs without warning or malicious intent. The wake following Raul's death drew considerable attendance. Colleagues from the financial institution, business associates, employees he'd supervised, friends from various stages of his life, all came to pay respects and offer condolences to the grieving widow. At the front of the room, near the casket, sat Liza Vergara. She wore a white dress and maintained a composed, quiet demeanor throughout the proceedings. Visitors approached, offered sympathetic words, and moved on. The steady stream of mourners created a rhythm of hushed conversations and solemn expressions. What several attendees later recalled was a peculiar detail. Liza never shed tears. Not during the viewing, not during private moments, not when speaking about her late husband. Her eyes remained dry throughout the entire wake. At the time, no one questioned this. Grief manifests differently for different people. Some assumed she'd already exhausted her tears privately. Others interpreted her composure as strength, a woman maintaining dignity during an impossibly difficult situation. A few thought perhaps she was in shock, processing trauma in a delayed fashion. The explanation that no one considered, that she felt no genuine grief because she'd orchestrated Raul's death, seemed too monstrous to contemplate. Among the attendees was Raul's younger brother, Arturo Vergara. Unlike others who accepted the accident at face value, Arturo felt increasingly unsettled as the days progressed. Something about the entire situation troubled him, though initially he couldn't articulate exactly what. His unease intensified about a week after Raul's burial when he received an unexpected phone call. The caller was one of the rescue personnel who'd responded to the accident scene, a man with automotive repair experience who'd noticed something unusual while extracting Raul's body from the wrecked SUV. According to this rescuer, the brake system showed signs of deliberate tampering. Specifically, the brake hose appeared to have been intentionally loosened. Additionally, there were traces of fluid in areas of the braking mechanism where such leakage wouldn't normally occur. This type of sabotage would cause gradual brake failure during operation. The vehicle would seem fine initially, but lose stopping power progressively as the driver continued using the brakes. The information stunned Arturo. His brother had been a cautious driver with no history of reckless behavior. Moreover, Raul maintained his vehicles meticulously, always addressing maintenance issues promptly. The idea that brake failure resulted from neglect seemed inconsistent with everything Arturo knew about his brother's character. His concern deepened when he discovered another anomaly. The SUV's dashcam footage was missing. Modern vehicles often have dashboard cameras that continuously record driving conditions. These devices can prove invaluable in accident investigations, providing objective documentation of what occurred. Raul's SUV had been equipped with such a camera. Yet when Arturo inquired about the footage, he learned that no recordings existed from the days immediately preceding the accident, nor from the fatal drive itself. The absence seemed suspicious. Had someone deliberately deleted the files? Arturo began making discreet inquiries among people familiar with his brother's household. Several employees mentioned that Benji, the family driver, had seemed unusually close to Liza. Staff members had occasionally observed them engaged in private conversations in corners when Raul wasn't present. Behavior that struck some as inappropriate given their respective positions. These observations alone didn't constitute proof of wrongdoing, but combined with the suspicious brake tampering and missing dashcam footage, they suggested a disturbing possibility that Arturo couldn't ignore. He made a decision. He would pursue this investigation properly, through official channels with professional expertise. If his brother's death was truly accidental, the investigation would confirm that. But if something more sinister had occurred, he owed it to Raul to uncover the truth. Arturo approached the National Bureau of Investigation, the Philippines' premier investigative agency, equivalent to the FBI in the United States. He presented his concerns: the suspicious brake tampering observed by the rescuer, the mysteriously absent dashcam footage, and the rumors about inappropriate closeness between his brother's wife and their family driver. The NBI took his concerns seriously. They arranged to examine the SUV, which had been stored in an impound facility pending insurance claim processing. Additionally, they agreed to attempt recovering deleted files from the dashcam's storage device. While waiting for results, Arturo found himself reviewing old family photographs, images of Raul with Maribel and young Clarice, pictures from happier times, before loss and betrayal entered their lives. He couldn't shake the conviction that his brother's death hadn't been accidental. The pieces didn't fit together properly. After approximately 2 weeks, the NBI summoned Arturo to their Manila office. In a small conference room, the cyber forensics team presented their findings. They'd successfully recovered several deleted files from the dashcam. The most significant was a video recorded 2 days before the accident, captured inside Raul's garage. The dashcam had been equipped with motion detection capability, a feature that automatically activated recording when movement occurred near the vehicle. The footage showed Benji, wearing a tank top and visibly perspiring, opening the SUV's hood and working underneath for several minutes. His focus was clearly on the area where the brake system components were located. The video provided visual documentation of exactly what the rescuer had suspected. Someone had deliberately tampered with the vehicle's brakes. But the evidence didn't stop there. The investigators had also obtained CCTV footage from an auto parts shop in town. The recording showed Benji purchasing brake fluid and a specific type of fitting used only on certain vehicle models, including the exact make and model of Raul's SUV. The shop owner confirmed he'd personally interacted with Benji during this transaction. The evidence clearly established that Benji had both the means and opportunity to sabotage Raul's vehicle. But what about motive? Why would a family driver want his employer dead? To answer that question, the NBI initiated discreet surveillance of both Liza and Benji. Over 3 weeks, agents documented multiple meetings between them at an apartment hotel in Lucena, encounters that occurred during times when both claimed to be elsewhere for legitimate purposes. The surveillance photos showed them arriving separately, staying for hours, and departing at different times to avoid suspicion. Their behavior exhibited the patterns typical of people conducting a clandestine affair while attempting to maintain appearances. As Arturo sat in the investigator's office reviewing the evidence, he felt rage building. Not just grief over his brother's death, but fury at the betrayal by people Raul had trusted completely. His wife and his employee had conspired together, conducting an affair under his nose and ultimately murdering him to clear their path. The investigators laid out the evidence methodically across the conference table. Dashcam footage of brake tampering, CCTV from the auto parts purchase, surveillance photos documenting the affair. Each piece contributed to a comprehensive picture of premeditated murder disguised as accidental death. Arturo sat silently, his expression hard. He knew that soon these two individuals would face justice in court, answering for what they'd done to a man who'd shown them nothing but trust and generosity. The NBI prepared to make arrests. November 2018. The NBI planned a coordinated operation to arrest both suspects simultaneously, preventing either from warning the other or attempting to flee. The team divided into 2 groups. One would apprehend Liza at her parents' compound in Lucena. The other would intercept Benji, who was under surveillance at a bus terminal, where intelligence suggested he planned to travel to Dumaguete, a city on a different island, far from the investigation's center. Early morning, the operation commenced. At Liza's family compound, the surroundings appeared peaceful and normal. Nothing suggested the occupants anticipated what was about to occur. NBI agents entered quietly, carrying a warrant for Liza's arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. They found her in the living room, apparently preparing for departure on a trip. When agents identified themselves and informed her she was under arrest, Liza appeared shocked. Initially, she refused to cooperate, insisting there must be some mistake. But the agents had legal authority, and after a tense exchange, she was taken into custody. Meanwhile, at the bus terminal, Benji sat, absorbed in his mobile phone, unaware of the undercover agents positioned nearby. He held a ticket and identification documents for his planned journey. When the team leader gave the signal, multiple agents moved simultaneously. Benji had no opportunity to escape or discard evidence. He was apprehended while still holding his travel documents, evidence suggesting he'd been preparing to leave the area permanently. Both suspects were transported to NBI facilities for processing and interrogation. The arrests marked a turning point, transforming what had been treated as an unfortunate accident into a formal criminal investigation of murder. Word of the arrests spread quickly through the community. People who'd attended Raul's funeral and offered condolences to his widow now learned she stood accused of orchestrating his death. The revelation shocked many who'd known the couple, though some recalled Liza's unusual lack of grief at the wake, and wondered if that composure had reflected not strength, but guilty conscience. For Arturo, the arrests brought a measure of satisfaction, but no joy. Justice was being pursued, but it couldn't restore his brother. The legal process ahead would be lengthy and emotionally draining, requiring him to relive the circumstances of Raul's death repeatedly, through testimony and evidence presentation. He also needed to inform Clarice, Raul's daughter, studying in California, about the true nature of her father's death. She'd been told initially that he'd died in a weather-related accident. Now she would learn that her stepmother and the family driver had murdered him. The news would shatter whatever peace she'd managed to construct while processing her grief. The arrests also meant that the conspiracy's full scope would be revealed through investigation. What messages had the conspirators exchanged? How long had the affair been ongoing? When had they decided murder was preferable to divorce? Had they planned to leave together afterward, perhaps starting a new life elsewhere? All these questions would be answered as investigators examined seized evidence, particularly the suspects' mobile phones and financial records. Modern technology, ironically, often provides the clearest documentation of criminal intent. Text messages, digital photos, bank transfers, all create permanent records that can't easily be erased, even when people believe they've covered their tracks. The investigation was transitioning from evidence gathering to prosecution. The next phase would play out in court, where the full story of betrayal and calculated murder would be presented publicly. As prosecutors prepared their case, forensic analysts conducted detailed examinations of evidence seized during the arrests. The suspects' mobile phones proved particularly revealing. Digital devices contain layers of information that users often forget exists, even after attempting deletions. From Benji's phone and Liza's device, investigators recovered text messages and messenger conversations that documented not merely an extramarital affair, but explicit planning of Raul's murder. The messages weren't subtle or ambiguous. They contained direct discussions about removing Raul as an obstacle to their relationship. The digital conversations revealed detailed coordination. Liza had provided information about Raul's schedule and travel plans, intelligence that allowed Benji to choose an optimal time for the sabotage. They discussed various methods before settling on brake tampering, apparently believing it would appear sufficiently accidental to avoid investigation. Some messages referenced their secret meetings at various locations throughout the region. Others detailed Liza's planned excuses for being away from home, the fabricated appointments and obligations she'd used to create opportunities for their encounters. The affair hadn't been a brief indiscretion, but an ongoing relationship conducted with deliberate deception over an extended period. The phone's photo galleries provided additional evidence. Numerous images showed Liza and Benji together at resorts and beaches in Batangas and Bicol provinces, locations they'd visited during periods when Raul was away on business. These weren't innocent group photos, but intimate images of a couple enjoying romantic getaways. The pictures documented the relationship's duration and seriousness. The NBI presented these photographs to prosecutors as evidence of the sustained, deliberate nature of the conspiracy. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion, but a calculated plot developed over time. Financial records added another dimension to the case. Bank transaction histories revealed that, shortly before the accident, a substantial sum had been transferred from an account in Raul's name. The receiving account had been opened recently, and documents showed Liza as co-owner due to her status as Raul's spouse. Further investigation uncovered that this money was intended to fund their planned relocation to Negros, a different region, where they apparently hoped to start over together after Raul's death. The timing was particularly damning. The transfer occurred just days before the brake sabotage, suggesting the murder had been scheduled to follow financial preparations. Prosecutors recognized they possessed an exceptionally strong case. The evidence chain was comprehensive. Motive, the affair and desire to be together. Means, Benji's access to Raul's vehicle and mechanical knowledge. Opportunity, Benji's position as family driver giving him unsupervised access to the garage. Planning, documented in digital communications. And preparation, the financial transfers positioning them to flee afterward. During interrogation, both suspects denied involvement, though their strategies differed. Benji claimed he'd tampered with the brakes but insisted Liza had known nothing about it, portraying the murder as his independent action, motivated by obsessive attraction rather than conspiracy. This defense attempted to shield Liza from the most serious charges. Liza, conversely, claimed complete ignorance of any plot. She characterized her relationship with Benji as merely friendly, and insisted the digital messages were being misinterpreted. She suggested Benji had acted alone, perhaps motivated by delusion or mental instability. Neither defense was credible given the evidence. The messages clearly showed mutual planning. The financial preparations required Liza's active participation. The provision of Raul's schedule information could only have come from her. Every piece of evidence contradicted their claims of non-involvement or limited culpability. Prosecutors prepared to present a parricide charge against Liza, the specific Philippine legal term for a spouse killing their partner, and a murder charge against Benji, both enhanced by evidence of premeditation and conspiracy. The trial commenced in early 2019, drawing significant public attention. Cases involving affairs, betrayal, and murder consistently captivate audiences, and this one contained all those elements, plus the aggravating factor of elaborate planning and deception. Clarice returned from California to attend the proceedings. Now a young woman pursuing higher education abroad, she sat quietly in the courtroom's gallery, clutching a small black purse containing an old family photograph of herself with Raul and her mother Maribel, a reminder of when her family had been intact and genuine. Each time prosecutors mentioned her father's name during testimony, Clarice visibly struggled with emotion. Her eyes would redden, though she maintained composure, refusing to break down in the presence of the people who'd murdered the parent she had left. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. First, they established the victim's background. A successful, careful man with no history suggesting he'd take reckless risks with his own safety. They presented testimony from colleagues and friends, describing Raul as conscientious and detail-oriented, particularly regarding vehicle maintenance. Next came the technical evidence. The rescuer with automotive expertise testified about the suspicious brake tampering he'd observed at the accident scene. A certified mechanic provided expert analysis of how the sabotage would function, creating progressive brake failure that would seem like mechanical malfunction rather than deliberate interference. The dashcam footage was presented, showing Benji working under the SUV's hood in the area where brake components were located. This visual evidence was devastating, providing direct documentation of the sabotage being performed. Defense attorneys had no effective way to explain away video showing their client tampering with the exact system that failed during the fatal accident. The auto parts shop CCTV and the owner's testimony confirmed Benji had purchased specific materials needed for the sabotage shortly before performing it. This established premeditation. He'd acquired necessary supplies in advance rather than acting impulsively. Then came the digital evidence. Prosecutors displayed the recovered text messages and messenger conversations, reading selections aloud in court. The exchanges were damning. Explicit discussions about removing the obstacle, references to being together freely, and coordination of timing based on Raul's schedule provided by Liza. The court saw photographs from the couple's romantic getaways, evidence of a sustained affair, not a momentary indiscretion. Financial experts testified about the suspicious transfers and the newly opened account clearly intended to facilitate their planned escape to Negros. Throughout this presentation, both defendants maintained their claims of limited or no involvement, but their defenses appeared increasingly implausible against the mountain of evidence. The prosecution also addressed the missing dashcam footage from the days immediately preceding the accident. Their theory: Benji had deleted these files to remove any potential evidence of earlier attempts or preparations. The fact that only specific periods were missing, while other recordings remained, suggested deliberate selection rather than technical malfunction. Clarissa's presence in the courtroom served as a silent reminder of the human cost. This wasn't merely a legal proceeding about abstract crimes. It was about a daughter who'd lost her father, a brother who'd lost his sibling, a family destroyed by greed and betrayal. The defense attempted to create reasonable doubt, suggesting the evidence was circumstantial or misinterpreted. But the combination of physical evidence, digital records, financial documentation, and witness testimony created an overwhelming case that left little room for alternative explanations. After nearly a year of legal proceedings, hearings, testimony, evidence presentation, and deliberation, the trial reached its conclusion. October 2019. The courtroom was packed with observers, media representatives, and those personally connected to the case. The atmosphere was tense as the judge prepared to announce the verdict. Arturo sat with Clarice, both maintaining outward calm despite internal anxiety. On the opposite side of the courtroom, Liza and Benji stood before the judge, their fates about to be formally determined. The judge began by reviewing the case's key elements. The evidence, he noted, overwhelmingly supported the prosecution's theory. The dashcam footage showing brake tampering, combined with the purchase of sabotage materials, established that Benji had deliberately rendered Raul's vehicle unsafe. The digital communications between the defendants demonstrated that this wasn't an independent action, but a conspiracy, both parties aware of and participating in the plan to murder Raul. The financial records showing preparations for relocation to Negros, the judge continued, revealed the defendants' intention to benefit from the crime by starting a new life together, using Raul's resources. This established not just murder but premeditated, calculated murder, committed for personal gain, and to eliminate an obstacle to their relationship. The court found both defendants guilty. Lisa was convicted of parricide, the specific crime of killing one's spouse. Benji was convicted of murder as a co-conspirator who'd executed the physical aspects of the crime. Both convictions carried the enhancement of premeditation, reflecting the planned nature of their actions. The sentence: reclusion perpetua for both defendants. This Philippine legal term translates roughly to life imprisonment. Though it doesn't necessarily mean literal lifetime incarceration, it represents the most serious penalty short of capital punishment, typically meaning a minimum of 20 to 40 years without possibility of parole. But the court's decision extended beyond criminal penalties. There were also civil consequences to address. The judge ruled that all insurance claims and inheritance rights that would normally flow to Liza as Raul's widow were automatically voided. Under Philippine law, individuals who murder family members cannot profit from their crimes through inheritance. Instead, all assets, insurance proceeds, and property rights would transfer to Clarice as Raul's legitimate heir from his first marriage to Maribel. Additionally, the court appointed Arturo as administrator of Raul's estate. This role would continue while Clarice completed her education abroad, ensuring the assets were properly managed and protected. Arturo would guarantee that his niece received appropriate support for her studies in America, and that her inheritance remained secure until she could manage it independently. When the judge finished reading the verdict and sentence, a collective release of tension rippled through the courtroom. For Arturo and Clarice, the decision represented validation, acknowledgement that their loss had been real, that the crime had occurred exactly as they'd believed, and that justice was being served. For Liza and Benji, the reality of their situations settled heavily. The scheme they'd believed would free them to be together had instead destroyed both their lives. Rather than starting fresh in Negros with Raul's money, they would spend decades imprisoned separately, their affair and conspiracy having cost them everything. As guards escorted the convicted defendants from the courtroom, neither showed much reaction. Perhaps they were still processing the magnitude of consequences. Perhaps they'd anticipated this outcome and had mentally prepared. Or perhaps they simply had nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, Arturo spoke briefly with media, expressing gratitude for the judicial system's thoroughness and relief that his brother's death had been properly investigated and prosecuted. Following the convictions, Liza and Benji were transferred to separate facilities to begin serving their sentences. The affair that had driven them to murder now existed only as a memory. They would never see each other again outside prison visiting rooms, if they maintained contact at all. Life imprisonment provides significant time for reflection. Both would spend years, likely decades, contemplating the choices that led them to this outcome. What had made murder seem preferable to simply leaving? Divorce, while potentially complicated and expensive, was legal and available. Instead, they'd chosen the most extreme solution, destroying lives, including their own in the process. Psychological experts who studied the case noted patterns common to such situations. Affairs often create a bubble of unreality, where conspirators convince themselves that their relationship is special, that normal rules don't apply, and that eliminating obstacles is justified. The secrecy and intensity of forbidden relationships can distort judgment, making extreme actions seem reasonable within the limited worldview the affair creates. Financial motivation had clearly played a role as well. Had Liza divorced Raul, she would have received some settlement, but nothing approaching the full value of his estate, plus insurance. Murder, if successful, would have left her as the widow inheriting everything. Combined with her desire to be with Benji, the crime offered both romantic fulfillment and financial security. A potent combination that overrode moral and legal constraints. What they'd failed to adequately consider was the risk of discovery. They'd believed the brake tampering would appear accidental, not anticipating that a rescue worker with mechanical expertise would recognize the sabotage. They'd thought deleting dashcam footage would eliminate evidence, not knowing that digital forensics could recover deleted files. They'd assumed their digital communications were private, not understanding how thoroughly modern devices retain information. Their fundamental miscalculation was believing they could commit the perfect crime. In reality, modern investigative techniques, especially digital forensics, make concealing murder increasingly difficult. For Clarice, the trial's conclusion allowed her to begin processing her grief properly. Initially, she'd mourned her father's death as a tragic accident. Learning it was murder reopened the wound. But having the truth acknowledged officially, seeing the perpetrators convicted and sentenced, provided a form of closure. Justice wouldn't restore her father, but it validated that what happened to him mattered, that society recognized the wrong and imposed consequences. She returned to California to continue her education, now with financial security from her inheritance. Her father's careful financial planning, the career he'd built, the assets he'd accumulated, would support her future as he'd always intended, just through different mechanisms than he'd anticipated. Arturo fulfilled his role as estate administrator conscientiously. He ensured Clarice received regular support for her educational expenses and living costs. He maintained the properties and investments, growing the estate's value rather than simply preserving it. He took seriously the responsibility his brother had inadvertently placed on him. In the community where Raul had lived and worked, the case became a cautionary tale. People discussed it when warning about the dangers of betrayal, the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships, and the reality that those closest to us sometimes pose the greatest threats. The financial institution where Raul had worked established a small memorial, not a grand gesture, but acknowledgement of a valued colleague whose life had been cut short by those who should have been trustworthy. Years later, reflecting on the case, investigators and prosecutors considered it a successful example of modern forensic investigation. The dashcam recovery, digital forensics, and financial analysis had combined to build an irrefutable case. Without these technological capabilities, the murder might indeed have succeeded in appearing accidental. The case demonstrated that truth, while sometimes difficult to uncover, typically reveals itself eventually. Careful investigation, persistent family members refusing to accept convenient explanations, and modern forensic tools combined to expose what the perpetrators believed they'd hidden successfully. For Liza and Benji, now middle-aged and imprisoned separately, the affair that once seemed worth any price had cost them everything: freedom, reputation, future prospects, and ultimately, each other. The passion that drove them to murder had transformed into regret, isolation, and the long, slow passage of prison years. Justice, imperfect as any human system must be, had functioned as intended, identifying truth, establishing accountability, and imposing consequences proportional to the harm caused.